It all started with a single sheet of paper, a permit, official, stamped, approved. For most people, it would have been nothing more than a routine document, but for Ryan, it was the ticket to a long-awaited dream. After years of saving, budgeting, and planning, he had finally secured approval to build a backyard pool, not a giant, flashy monstrosity, just a modest oasis where his kids could splash in the summer and neighbors could gather on hot afternoons. The permit had come after weeks of navigating city bureaucracy, endless phone calls, and meticulous planning. It was pinned proudly to the bulletin board in his kitchen, ready for contractors to begin. Everything was set. Until one morning, it was gone. At first, Ryan thought he'd misplaced it. He scoured drawers, counters, and folders. He retraced his steps, certain he'd left it near the fridge. But the paper had vanished without a trace. Confusion turned to dread as he realized the truth. Someone had taken it. That someone, of course, was Karen. Karen lived 2 doors down, the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood. Middle-aged, sharp-tongued, and armed with an endless supply of indignation, she had a reputation for sticking her nose where it didn't belong. She was the kind of person who measured the height of your grass, took photos of recycling bins left out too long, and sent strongly worded emails about community standards. And she had made no secret of her feelings about Ryan's pool. She had cornered him weeks earlier, insisting the pool would be a liability and a nuisance. She warned that it would attract noise, lower property values, and endanger children. Ryan had brushed her off, thinking her protests were nothing more than idle threats. But now, staring at the empty spot on his bulletin board, he realized just how far she was willing to go. The theft didn't remain secret for long. Word traveled quickly in the neighborhood, as it always did. A neighbor mentioned seeing Karen near Ryan's front porch the evening before, suspiciously holding a folder. Another recalled overhearing her bragging at the HOA meeting that she had taken care of the pool problem. The puzzle pieces clicked into place. Karen had stolen the permit. The consequences hit immediately. When the contractor arrived to break ground, he refused to start without the official paper. Calls to the city office confirmed that replacements weren't simple. The process would take weeks, maybe months. Worse still, Karen began spreading rumors that Ryan had faked his permit, telling anyone who would listen that he had never been approved in the first place. The frustration boiled over. Ryan's kids had been counting down the days until their pool was built. Neighbors who were excited about backyard barbecues and summer swims looked disappointed, and Karen walked around the neighborhood with her head high, smug in her victory. But what Karen didn't realize was that she hadn't ended Ryan's dream. She had sparked something far bigger. Instead of sulking, Ryan began to imagine alternatives. If Karen wanted to fight him over a pool, what would happen if he aimed even higher? If one little rectangle of water caused her so much distress, how would she react if he turned his entire yard into something bigger, louder, and far more spectacular? The idea began small, maybe a larger pool, maybe a hot tub on the side. But the longer he thought about it, the more ambitious it grew. What if it wasn't just a pool? What if it was slides, fountains, and waterfalls? What if it was a full-scale water park, right in his own backyard? The thought filled him with equal parts mischief and determination. Karen wanted to play dirty, but two could play that game. She had stolen his permit to stop him. Now, he was going to build something that would make her regret ever starting the fight. He began researching immediately. Above-ground pool kits, DIY water slides, inflatable structures, decorative fountains. His search history became a catalog of aquatic chaos. What started as a setback had transformed into a vision. The more Karen tried to tighten her grip on the neighborhood, the more he wanted to splash water all over her carefully curated order. The neighbors, too, began to whisper. Some sympathized, others chuckled, and a few even offered to help. They had grown tired of Karen's constant meddling, and the idea of watching her unravel at the sight of a full-blown water park was too good to resist. Ryan didn't say much out loud, but inside, he was resolved. Karen had crossed a line. The permit was gone, but the dream wasn't. And by the time summer hit, Karen would be standing at her window, fuming, while the rest of the neighborhood lined up for the biggest splash they'd ever seen. The war had begun, not with shouts or confrontations, but with a single piece of stolen paper. Karen thought she had won, but she had no idea what kind of storm she had just unleashed. Because if she hated the idea of one pool, she was about to find out how much she despised a water park. Once the idea took root, Ryan couldn't let it go. The stolen pool permit that was supposed to be a roadblock became the spark of something far larger. If Karen wanted to make a battle out of this, then Ryan was going to win. Not by playing small, but by going big enough that she could never stop it. But he knew he couldn't simply announce his plans. Karen had eyes everywhere. She lingered on porches, peered through blinds, and prowled the neighborhood like a self-declared watchwoman. If he made his intentions too obvious, she'd start calling inspectors before the first shovel hit the dirt. No, this plan would need stealth, patience, and just the right amount of mischief. The first step was research. Nights were spent scrolling through online stores and DIY forums, jotting down notes about above-ground pool kits, inflatable slides, and modular fountains. He realized quickly that he didn't need permits for everything. A simple backyard pool required paperwork, but a collection of temporary structures, inflatable slides, detachable fountains, above-ground splash pads, was a loophole. They weren't classified as permanent installations, which meant Karen's stolen paper was useless against them. It was genius. He could build an entire aquatic playground without technically breaking a single rule. Slowly, boxes began to arrive. They came in discreet brown packaging, no labels that screamed Waterpark. A pump here, a vinyl liner there, a set of pipes tucked inside another box. Contractors were replaced with friends and neighbors, people who had quietly grown tired of Karen's constant meddling. They came on weekends, after work, or under cover of night. The sound of drills and laughter echoed softly in the dark, just low enough to avoid Karen's suspicious ears. But Karen noticed something was happening. Of course she did. She began her patrols more frequently, walking her dog past Ryan's house 3 times a day. She lingered at the edge of his driveway, trying to peek past the fence. She even stopped delivery drivers, asking them pointed questions about what was inside the boxes they dropped off. Her paranoia was obvious, and her frustration grew with each vague answer. She knew something was coming, but she didn't know what. The first real test came with the arrival of the above-ground pool kit. It was too large to disguise, arriving on a flatbed truck that rumbled down the street in broad daylight. Karen's face appeared in her window like clockwork, her silhouette stiff and outraged. She stormed out onto the sidewalk, snapping photos as the boxes were unloaded. Ryan pretended not to notice, smiling politely as if nothing unusual was happening. What Karen didn't know was that the pool was just the beginning. Once the frame was up and the liner filled with sparkling blue water, Ryan could feel momentum building. His kids splashed with excitement, neighbors peeked over the fence with grins, and Karen fumed on her lawn, phone glued to her ear as she called every office she could think of. City inspectors came, clipboards in hand, but each time they shrugged. An above-ground pool with no permanent alterations wasn't against the rules. Karen's gotcha moment evaporated into thin air, leaving her sputtering. That small victory emboldened Ryan. Now he wanted more. Over the next few weeks, his yard transformed piece by piece. A bright yellow inflatable slide curved into the pool, towering higher than the fence line, so that Karen could see it from her kitchen window. Decorative fountains shot arcs of water into the air, powered by pumps he had assembled himself. A splash pad spread across the grass for toddlers and younger kids, spraying jets of water into the summer air. The sound of rushing water became the soundtrack of the street. The squeals of children joined the laughter of adults, echoing across the cul-de-sac. What had started as a backyard pool was quickly becoming something else entirely. The neighborhood's unofficial water park. And the neighbors noticed. Families began to stop by more often, bringing snacks and lawn chairs. Teenagers dove into the pool, racing each other down the slide. Parents mingled with drinks in hand, grateful for a place to relax while their kids played. What was supposed to be Ryan's private retreat had become a community hub, and that was exactly what Karen hated most. Because for all her claims about safety and property values, Karen's true motive had always been control. She wanted to dictate what happened on every lawn, behind every fence. But here was Ryan, not just resisting her, but winning the neighborhood to his side. The sight of her neighbors laughing in Ryan's yard, ignoring her scowls, was a humiliation she couldn't bear. So Karen escalated. She began documenting everything. She filmed children playing, adults lounging, water spraying into the air. She took dozens of photos, sending them in angry emails to the HOA and city offices. She claimed the water park was a hazard, that it violated codes, that it was turning the neighborhood into a circus. But the more she ranted, the more the officials rolled their eyes. Without a clear violation, their hands were tied. Her desperation grew more obvious when she began confronting parents directly. She cornered mothers walking home, warning them that Ryan's unlicensed water park was dangerous. She told children they weren't allowed to go near it. She even put up flyers, warning of toxic chemicals in the pool. Each move only pushed people further away. The neighborhood wasn't buying it. Meanwhile, Ryan kept building. With each addition, Karen's rage burned hotter. A second slide appeared, twisting down into the water. A set of pool lights lit up the yard at night, casting shimmering patterns across the grass. By midsummer, the transformation was undeniable. Ryan didn't just have a pool. He had built a backyard attraction that rivaled the community center. And the best part? It was all technically within the rules. For Karen, it was a nightmare. For Ryan, it was only the beginning. The stolen permit had turned into something no one could have predicted. The yard wasn't just a water park. It was becoming the heart of the neighborhood, a symbol of defiance against her control. And as word spread, the gatherings grew larger. Soon, it wasn't just close neighbors. Families from across the subdivision wanted to see it for themselves. The laughter grew louder, the splashes bigger, and the parties longer. Karen's control was slipping away, and she knew it. But she wasn't about to surrender quietly. If Ryan thought a water park was enough to finish the fight, he was wrong. Because Karen was already planning her next move, a plan that would drag the HOA into the war and escalate the battle to levels no one had expected. The water park had taken on a life of its own. What began as a personal project was now a community spectacle, complete with slides, fountains, and laughter that rolled across the neighborhood like summer thunder. Ryan could feel the tide shifting. Neighbors who once kept to themselves now lingered in his backyard, bonding over shared frustrations, forming friendships in the spray of sprinklers and the glimmer of pool lights. But for Karen, every splash was a dagger. The more popular Ryan's yard became, the more irrelevant she felt. Her reign as self-appointed guardian of the HOA's standards was unraveling. For years she had ruled with intimidation, scolding residents over the length of their grass, the color of their shutters, or the placement of their trash cans. People tolerated her simply to avoid conflict. But now they were ignoring her altogether, and nothing stung worse than being irrelevant. So Karen escalated her crusade. One humid morning, residents found new flyers plastered to their doors. Typed in bold font, the message screamed about illegal structures, unpermitted water hazards, and dangerous gatherings. At the bottom, in Karen's unmistakable handwriting, was a demand. Attend the emergency HOA meeting this Friday. Mandatory for all members. It was clear. Karen had declared war. The days leading up to the meeting were tense. Neighbors whispered on sidewalks, speculating about what Karen had planned. Some rolled their eyes, others laughed, but a few worried about the consequences. After all, the HOA had power. Fines, liens, and lawsuits weren't out of the question. Even if Ryan was in the right, the board could make his life miserable. Karen was counting on that. When Friday arrived, the small community center was overflowing. Folding chairs lined the room, every seat taken, and still more people stood in the back. The air was heavy with heat and tension, the sound of papers rustling and fans whirring overhead. At the front of the room sat the HOA board, a collection of tired volunteers, clearly unprepared for the storm Karen was about to unleash. And then there was Karen. She stood at the podium with a binder so thick it looked like she had compiled a legal case. Photos spilled out, grainy shots of children on slides, water spraying, families laughing. Each image was accompanied by angry notes scrawled in red ink. Unsafe, unsanitary, unapproved. She tapped her papers dramatically as she began her tirade, her voice shrill enough to slice through the room. Karen painted the water park as a menace. She claimed it was lowering property values, attracting strangers, endangering children, and wasting community water resources. She waved the stolen pool permit like a trophy, brandishing it as proof of Ryan's alleged violations. Her words were sharp, her tone dripping with righteous fury. But something unexpected happened. Instead of nodding along, the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Parents crossed their arms, neighbors exchanged skeptical glances, and murmurs rippled through the room. Karen was used to obedience, but now she was met with resistance. And then came the turning point. One by one, neighbors began to speak. A mother stood up, recounting how her children had never had such joy in the neighborhood until Ryan's water park. A father spoke about the sense of community the gatherings had brought back. An elderly couple admitted they loved sitting on their porch, listening to the laughter on summer nights. It reminded them of better times. Each testimony chipped away at Karen's authority. By the time Ryan finally stood to address the board, the mood had shifted entirely. Calm and measured, he explained his process, how the structures were temporary, how no rules were technically broken, how every precaution had been taken for safety. He outlined the city inspections, the loopholes that allowed above-ground installations, the absence of any legal violation. Where Karen had relied on drama, Ryan relied on facts, and the facts were clear. The HOA board, weary of Karen's theatrics, quietly sided with Ryan. They declared that while they would monitor the situation, no rules had been broken. The case was closed. Karen was furious. Her face turned red, her fists clenched, and her words stumbled as she realized the meeting hadn't gone her way. Instead of rallying the neighborhood against Ryan, she had revealed just how unpopular she truly was. The board dismissed her with polite disinterest, moving on to trivial agenda items like landscaping contracts and mailbox repairs. But the damage was done. Karen stormed out of the meeting, binder clutched to her chest, muttering threats about not being finished. The neighbors watched her go, many shaking their heads, others smirking at her defeat. And when they left the community center, they didn't go home. They went to Ryan's. That night, the water park was more crowded than ever. Music played, lights shimmered on the water, and laughter filled the air until late. It wasn't just a party, it was a celebration, a collective rejection of Karen's reign. For the first time, the neighborhood wasn't afraid of her anymore. But Ryan knew better than to assume it was over. Karen was relentless. The permit theft had been only her opening move, and the HOA defeat was just fuel for her obsession. And sure enough, she was already plotting. If the board wouldn't stop Ryan, she'd go above them. City officials, county inspectors, even state regulators, Karen was ready to climb every bureaucratic ladder to shut him down. For Ryan, the battle had shifted. It was no longer about just building a pool or even a water park. It was about standing up to someone who thrived on control, who believed rules only existed to serve her. And deep down, he was ready for the fight. Because what Karen didn't realize was that the more she tried to tear him down, the more the neighborhood rallied around him. What she saw as chaos, they saw as freedom. What she called rebellion, they called community. The war wasn't over. In fact, it was only heating up. And soon, the battle lines would stretch beyond the HOA and into the city itself, where Karen was determined to make her last stand, and Ryan was prepared to prove that her stolen permit meant nothing against the wave of unity he had built. The HOA meeting had ended in humiliation for Karen, but if history had proven anything, it was that she never accepted defeat quietly. For her, control was like oxygen, and every laugh, every splash, every barbecue Ryan hosted felt like a personal suffocation. So while the neighborhood celebrated their newfound freedom, Karen began building a new plan. If the HOA wouldn't side with her, she would find someone who would. Her binder became her weapon. Every evening, neighbors could see her porch light burning late into the night as she sifted through papers, printed regulations, and city codes. She combed through websites, highlighted ordinances, and called hotlines, her shrill voice echoing through the receiver as she demanded answers. Her obsession consumed her. And then, one hot Thursday afternoon, it happened. 2 white city trucks rolled down the neighborhood street. Out stepped inspectors in reflective vests, clipboards in hand, surveying Ryan's property with the slow, deliberate walk of men who had seen it all before. The moment the vehicles appeared, Karen bolted from her house, clutching her binder, practically running to greet them like a queen meeting her knights. She gestured wildly toward Ryan's yard, her voice rising as she unloaded every grievance, her finger stabbing the air like a weapon. Inside Ryan's house, the mood shifted instantly. Through the window, he spotted the inspectors pacing along his fence line, their pens scratching across their forms. Conversations hushed, kids stopped mid-play, and adults exchanged uneasy glances. The Waterpark, so recently a source of joy, suddenly felt vulnerable under the cold gaze of authority. Ryan stepped outside, calm but cautious. The inspectors were polite, but their questions were sharp. What structures had been installed? Were there safety measures in place? Did he possess the proper approvals? Each inquiry felt like a dart, designed to find weakness. And all the while, Karen hovered nearby, grinning smugly, clearly convinced this was the moment she would finally win. But Ryan had anticipated this. Weeks earlier, when the Waterpark plan had first taken shape, he had quietly consulted city guidelines. He knew Karen would escalate, and he wasn't about to hand her an easy victory. Every slide was technically temporary equipment. Every pool was above ground and classified as a recreational installation. Nothing required a permanent building permit. Safety barriers had been installed, water drainage had been considered, and even insurance riders had been updated. On paper, Ryan wasn't just compliant. He was untouchable. The inspectors moved methodically, jotting notes, snapping photos. Karen tried to interject, waving her binder, thrusting documents in their faces, but they brushed her aside. Their focus remained on the property, not her theatrics. When they finally regrouped at their truck, the neighborhood watched with bated breath. Karen lingered close, her anticipation practically vibrating through the air. And then came the verdict: no violations. The inspectors acknowledged the scale of the project, but concluded that nothing technically broke city code. The Waterpark was unconventional, yes, but legal. They advised Ryan to maintain safety precautions and notify them of any major expansions, but otherwise their hands were tied. The moment their words were spoken, Karen's expression collapsed. Her triumphant smirk twisted into disbelief, then fury. She argued, pleaded, demanded they reconsider. But the inspectors, unfazed, simply handed Ryan a paper with their notes and returned to their trucks. Within minutes, they were gone, leaving behind the unmistakable sound of children laughing as they cannonballed back into the pool. Karen, however, didn't retreat quietly. She stood in her yard, binder clutched tight, trembling with rage. Her neighbors, who had gathered to watch the showdown, exchanged smirks and knowing glances. Some even clapped softly as Ryan returned to his deck, holding up the inspection report like a victory banner. It was a symbolic moment. The city itself had sided with him, not her. But victory brought with it a new realization. Karen wasn't finished. If anything, the defeat had only deepened her obsession. She began documenting everything with a ferocity that bordered on madness. Cars parked near Ryan's house, she snapped photos. Trash bags set out after a party, she scribbled notes. The sound of music in the evening, she recorded videos, muttering commentary about noise ordinances. Her binder doubled in size within a week. And then came her most drastic move yet. Late one evening, while the water park lights glowed and families enjoyed the cool relief of the water, Karen slipped into her backyard with a camera. She scaled her deck to peer over the fence, angling for photos of the water park and its visitors. Neighbors caught glimpses of her crouched in the shadows, her lens glinting in the glow of Ryan's lights. Some whispered that she was crossing a dangerous line, no longer just a nuisance, but a potential trespasser. Ryan knew he had won the battle, but the war was shifting into something darker. It was no longer just about permits and pools. It was about obsession. Karen wasn't trying to protect the neighborhood anymore. She was trying to destroy him. The neighbors noticed, too. Where once they had tolerated Karen's antics, now they began openly mocking her. Conversations at mailboxes turned into jokes at her expense. Kids pointed and laughed when they saw her pacing with her binder, and the more she was ridiculed, the more desperate she became. Ryan understood one thing clearly. Karen wouldn't stop until she either won or was utterly broken. And if she was willing to bring in inspectors once, she'd do it again. Perhaps next time with lawyers, perhaps with law enforcement. But what Karen didn't realize was that Ryan wasn't afraid anymore. He had the neighborhood at his back, city compliance on his side, and a water park that had become more than just a backyard project. It was a symbol of freedom, of defiance, and of standing up to someone who believed she could control everyone. As the summer heat pressed on and the water park continued to thrive, the stage was set for the next round of conflict. Karen had failed with the HOA. She had failed with the inspectors, but she wasn't retreating. No, she was planning something even bigger, something designed to destroy Ryan's project once and for all. And as whispers spread of legal filings and lawsuits, the neighborhood braced itself for the storm that was coming. Because Karen was about to take the fight to the courthouse. Karen had failed to stop the water park with the HOA. She had failed with the city inspectors. She had even failed with her binder of supposed evidence, which now looked more like the ramblings of someone consumed by obsession than the proof of a neighborhood menace. But if there was one thing Karen knew, it was persistence. If intimidation and bureaucracy didn't work, then she would escalate to the one place she believed no one could ignore: the courts. The lawsuit arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. Ryan opened the envelope, and there it was. Pages of legal jargon accusing him of violating zoning laws, endangering children, and operating an unlicensed commercial water attraction. Karen's attorney had packaged her complaints into a formal case, demanding the immediate removal of the water park and hefty damages for distress and devaluation of property. It was a bold move, and for a moment, it shook Ryan. Lawsuits weren't like HOA fines or inspector visits. They were serious, costly, and stressful. Neighbors rallied quickly, offering support. But even they looked uneasy at the mention of lawyers and judges. Karen, meanwhile, strutted through the neighborhood like a queen preparing for coronation. She told anyone who would listen that justice was finally on her side and that Ryan's illegal carnival would soon be torn down. The weeks leading up to the court date were tense. Ryan had to hire his own lawyer, a quiet but sharp man who specialized in property disputes. Together, they combed through every detail: zoning maps, building codes, city approvals, insurance documents. Ryan provided receipts, permits, and safety reports, all carefully filed and ready. Where Karen's binder was filled with emotional rants and photos taken from her deck, Ryan's defense was precise and fact-based. Still, the looming courtroom battle cast a shadow over the neighborhood. The water park continued to operate. But now every splash carried an edge of uncertainty. Was this the last summer the kids would get to enjoy it? Would Karen actually succeed in tearing it all down? Finally, the day came. The courthouse was a plain brick building downtown, but to Ryan, it felt like an arena. Karen arrived early, dressed in her stiffest suit, binder in hand, her lawyer at her side. She looked smug, confident, as though she had already won. Ryan walked in with his attorney, flanked by several neighbors who had taken time off work just to support him. Their presence was quiet but powerful, a reminder that this wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who was tired of Karen's reign. The proceedings began, and Karen's lawyer wasted no time. He painted the water park as reckless, unsafe, and disruptive. He spoke of noise complaints, of unsupervised children, of traffic congestion from visitors. He claimed property values were plummeting because of Ryan's amusement park, and he waved Karen's binder as evidence of the chaos. Karen herself sat at the plaintiff's table, nodding vigorously, glaring at Ryan, occasionally whispering furiously to her attorney. She looked like someone who had waited her entire life for this moment, certain she would finally crush her enemy. But then it was Ryan's turn. His lawyer presented the facts calmly, methodically. The water park, he explained, was not permanent construction, but a collection of temporary above-ground installations. All safety standards had been met. The city inspectors had already cleared it. No zoning laws had been violated. Every complaint in Karen's binder was exaggerated, biased, or irrelevant. Then came the neighbors. One by one, they testified. Parents spoke about how the water park had given their children joy during long, hot summers. Retirees explained how it had brought the neighborhood together in ways they hadn't seen in decades. Even teenagers described how it had kept them out of trouble, giving them a safe place to hang out. The courtroom, once tense, began to shift. Where Karen's side was filled with anger and exaggeration, Ryan's side was filled with sincerity, facts, and undeniable community support. The judge listened carefully, her expression unreadable, but her questions grew increasingly pointed toward Karen's attorney. And then came the moment that broke everything. Karen, impatient with her lawyer's measured pace, demanded to take the stand herself. She launched into a tirade about noise, about property values, about illegal water carnivals, and hooligan behavior. But the more she spoke, the more unhinged she sounded. She admitted to spying on Ryan's yard, taking photos at night, even climbing her own deck to get better angles. Her words, meant to prove her dedication, instead revealed her obsession. The judge interrupted, asking bluntly if Karen could provide any actual evidence of danger or illegality. Karen faltered. Her binder, once her greatest weapon, now looked flimsy in the face of real law. When the gavel finally fell, the verdict was clear. The lawsuit was dismissed. Not only was Ryan allowed to keep his water park, but the judge also warned Karen about harassment and frivolous litigation. She was ordered to cover some of Ryan's legal fees, a humiliating blow that sent her storming from the courtroom red-faced and trembling with rage. For Ryan and his neighbors, the relief was overwhelming. They walked out of the courthouse together, smiling, laughing, the weight of uncertainty finally lifted. The water park was safe, legally untouchable, and stronger than ever. But Karen's fury didn't end at the courthouse doors. If anything, the defeat made her more dangerous. Stripped of legal power, publicly humiliated, and now mocked openly by her neighbors, she began to unravel. People whispered that she rarely left her house except to glare from her window. Others claimed she spent her nights pacing on her deck, clutching her binder, muttering about revenge. Ryan knew the war was nearly over, but he also knew Karen wasn't finished. There was one last eruption coming, the desperate act of someone who had lost everything but couldn't let go. And when it came, it would test not just Ryan, but the entire neighborhood. The lawsuit had ended in disaster for Karen. Her so-called evidence was laughed out of court, her obsession was laid bare, and instead of forcing Ryan to tear down his water park, she was left paying part of his legal fees. For most people, it would have been the end of the fight. For Karen, it was gasoline poured on the fire. She returned to the neighborhood a shell of her former self, clutching her binder as though it were armor, her pride shattered but her obsession still burning. The neighbors whispered when they saw her pacing her yard, glaring across the street, scribbling notes furiously. Once, she had wielded influence through intimidation. Now, she was the punchline to every joke, and nothing infuriated her more than the sound of laughter drifting from Ryan's backyard, the echo of children splashing in the pool, the reminder that she had lost. As summer peaked, the water park became a beacon. Families visited daily, teenagers lounged by the inflatable slides, and Ryan hosted weekend cookouts that seemed to grow larger each time. The atmosphere was electric, a celebration of community and resilience, and for Karen, it was unbearable. Her breaking point came one sweltering Saturday afternoon. Ryan's yard was packed. Neighbors, friends, even distant relatives had gathered for what had become an unofficial block party. Music pulsed, kids screamed with joy, and the scent of grilled food wafted down the street. Karen sat at her window, blinds drawn just enough for her to spy, her jaw clenched so tightly it ached. Her binder sat on the table beside her, useless now, filled with failed complaints and dismissed accusations. Hours ticked by, and the laughter only grew louder. Each cheer, each splash, each burst of applause was a reminder of her irrelevance. Finally, she snapped. Karen burst from her house, storming across her lawn with the energy of a storm about to break. She carried a garden rake in one hand and her binder in the other, her face red with rage, her voice carrying across the party as she screamed accusations. She accused Ryan of destroying the neighborhood, of brainwashing the residents, of turning their community into a circus. The party froze. Music stopped. Children fell silent. Adults stood in stunned disbelief as Karen, once the queen of the HOA, now looked like a caricature of her former self. Her hair was disheveled, her words slurred with fury, her gestures wild. She hurled papers from her binder into the air, letting them scatter like confetti across Ryan's lawn. She raised the rake as though to swing it, not at people, but at the very structures she despised, the pool, the slides, the fountains. But before she could act, neighbors stepped forward. Two fathers gently but firmly intercepted her, lowering the rake from her hands. A mother gathered the children away, shielding them from the scene. Others pulled out phones, recording as Karen flailed, shouting incoherently about rules, about standards, about being the only one who cared. It was the moment her power truly crumbled. Within hours, the video spread across social media. Locals who weren't even part of the neighborhood watched in disbelief as Karen's meltdown became a spectacle. Comments poured in, mockery, sympathy, and ridicule in equal measure. The woman who once thrived on control was now a viral sensation for losing it. The HOA, embarrassed and eager to distance itself, acted swiftly. At the next meeting, Karen was formally stripped of her position on any committee, barred from filing further complaints without board review. It was the final nail in the coffin of her influence. Where once she had been feared, she was now ignored, pitied, and forgotten. Ryan, on the other hand, emerged stronger than ever. His water park wasn't just a backyard project anymore. It was a symbol of standing up against petty tyranny. He had faced theft, harassment, inspections, and even a lawsuit, and yet his dream had survived. More than that, it had united his neighbors, turning a once fractured community into something vibrant and alive. As summer faded into fall, the water park slowly wound down. The inflatables were stored, the slides packed away, but the bonds forged remained. Neighbors who once barely waved at each other were now friends, families, allies. The laughter didn't end when the pool closed. It carried into block parties, game nights, and new traditions born from a single act of defiance. And Karen? She retreated further and further into isolation. Her blinds stayed closed, her yard unkempt, her binder collecting dust. The woman who once lived to control her neighbors now lived in silence, her power broken by the very community she had tried to dominate. For Ryan, the victory was bittersweet. He hadn't wanted a war, but in fighting it, he had discovered something greater than a pool or even a water park. He had discovered resilience. He had discovered unity. And he had proven that sometimes the best way to stand up to control is to live loudly, joyfully, and unapologetically. The water park had started as a dream stolen by Karen's petty theft. It had ended as a triumph that outlived her fury. And in the end, the story wasn't about a pool permit or even about revenge. It was about a neighborhood that chose laughter over fear, freedom over control, and community over the tyranny of one bitter woman. Karen had tried to steal his pool permit. Instead, she had given him something far greater, a reason to build not just a water park, but a legacy. And every summer after that, when the slides went back up and the music returned, the neighborhood remembered. They remembered the battles, the laughter, and the day Karen lost her crown. And they celebrated, not just in Ryan's yard, but in the simple fact that they were free. Because sometimes, the loudest splash is the one that drowns out the voice of control forever.